Welcome to the Health Feeds Performance podcast, where we believe that whole body nourishment is a requisite for athletic success. I'm your host, Ian Craig, from the Centre for Integrative Sports Nutrition, and today I'm talking to nutrition and genetic practitioner Karen Harrison from Team Gene. So today we're talking about female athlete health. And historically, research has very much focused on male athletes in the sort of sports science and nutrition world. So rightly so, women need a bit more attention in that realm. We're now in an interesting situation though, because we have coaches and athletes that might be swearing blind that periodising an athletic program around a woman's menstrual cycle's helping a lot. But then the scientists are still sitting on the fence and saying, hey, there's no proof of that. So we're going to go into topics like that and also through different life phases. So Karen, I know very well. Karen is brilliant at translating complex stuff into simple stuff. And I love listening to her talking, so I'm really looking forward to this one. So Karen, I'm going to hand over to you. Why don't you start by just introducing yourself, who you are, what you do, why you're interested in genetics, nutrition and sport as well.
Well, hello everybody, I am Karen. I do own the company Team Gene, but in general I really am just interested in how genetics are having a play in our lives, and I love to work with athletes purely and simply because you've also got a really good goal in mind, and you tend to be quite open-minded in regards to, yes, the science may or may not be there, but here is the theory, and as long as you're not just before you're having a competition or whatever, quite a lot of the time it's quite good to actually try and test the theory on that individual, because as we know, science is brilliant. Science is the way that we need to go, but everybody is individual. So we do need to have a little bit of understanding as to how the body works, and then dealing with that individual athlete who's in front of us at that particular time, and that's what drives me when I'm in practice.
So we said we'd go through the life stages of a female athlete. So let's start young. We have a female athlete who has her menstrual cycle. Performance is the name of the game. Maybe she's in her 20s, maybe she's in her 30s. In your mind, when you work from that personalised way that you just talked about, can that make a difference if we actually bring the menstrual cycle and timings, i.e. the time of the month, into the equation?
I believe that there is lots to gain from understanding an athlete in regards to where they are from a monthly perspective. And the reason I'm interested in that is because, research has started to find out that actually certain injuries or certain women have higher risks of certain injuries at certain times of the month. Now, and this is the thing with research, is that, we can get a whole group of women together, but we've all got different fluctuating hormones. So therefore, this is why quite a lot of the scientists are sitting on the fence at the moment, because there's when you deal with a group, then actually sometimes the results don't come back as clear as they would really like it to. So when you're dealing with an individual, you do look at the science, but effectively, some women do have a higher risk of, let's take the main sort of injury that a lot of women are having to deal with, ACL injuries. And it seems that ACL injuries are really sort of more prevalent in the sort of follicular phase. So at the very beginning. So if we're not don't understand the different phases. Follicular phase is from day 1, which is the first day of period, through to ovulation, and we've got day 14 if this is an average female, and then we have the luteal phase, which is from day 15 through to 28. So there is small amounts of research that's coming in. And to be honest with you, with an athlete, as I said at the beginning, if you're not actually doing a particular, 9-person or, an actual, you're not training for an actual event, then what you can do is you can experiment with doing particularly strength training, more beneficial, or is found to be more beneficial in follicular phase. And therefore, you might want to trial changing your actual training structure to do more of the strength training at the first part of the 2 weeks of the cycle, regards to the second 2 weeks, and see if there is any differences in regards to outcomes, times, and all the lovely stuff that we obviously all will be measuring. Now, I do want to just say that when you read the research, there is a small amount to say that there is an increase in injury, but of course it's down to that individual person. It may be that that person has higher amounts of injury, change it around, which I've had before, and injuries, they don't disappear, but they certainly aren't anywhere near as severe as they were before. So maybe we can actually reduce the severity of the injuries and then be able to help with recovery after that. Now, there's no real right or wrong reason as to why this may or may not be. We think that it's all to do with the fluctuations of the hormones, but there's no actual concrete evidence that says to us, in the follicular phase this is going to happen, and in the luteal phase this is going to happen. But we have found commonalities, particularly with ACL injuries.
So why ACL injuries? I mean, that's anterior cruciate ligament, common in things like football, basketball, any rotational sports. Is that just what's been researched so far, do you think? Like female basketball players?
Yeah, I think it's just really all about the fact that that is an injury that can be ascertained, and therefore it's something that can be measured. So, we've got strains and sprains and things like that will be, I don't know, perhaps labelled as exactly the same, but perhaps will present themselves differently in two different females. So that I think they've chosen ACLs because there is a clear definition of that.
Okay, I'm going to ask you about genetics in a minute around those ligament injuries. But you were talking about maybe training harder, especially with weight training first 2 weeks of the cycle versus the latter 2 weeks. When I coach, so I'm a coach as well, so I'll work with cyclists and runners, and I'll do a 3 week up, 1 week pull back kind of pattern. Would that be a good idea, rotating around the menstrual cycle? Say it's a 28-day sort of standard cycle, but maybe adjusting a bit if it's shorter or longer.
Yeah, absolutely. So, of course, 28 days is the medical sort of average. A lot of women out there have 32 days, and that is normal for them. That's what their periods or their cycles have always been. So, we have to take an average, and obviously that's the average that they've come up with, and that's what most people talk about as a cycle is 28 days. But a lot of women out there are either 26 days, they're 30, sometimes 32, and therefore if they are sort of nearer the 29, 30, 31 days, then yeah, you could do your 3 week increase and 1 week decrease and see if that actually makes any difference. But make sure you've got something that you are measuring. Don't just sort of try it and think, oh, well, actually I didn't have an injury this month. Always try and set, okay, what can we actually measure? let's put this in place and let's measure it again next month, and then let's actually see whether there's any changes that way, normally in performance or trials or times and that sort of stuff.
Okay, so good advice. You need a metric or a set of metrics, and all good athletes do that as anyway. You've got use of things like HRV as well now, which will presumably fluctuate. We'll also have the dynamics of if a female athlete's in a team, that makes it a wee bit harder, but here we're looking for sympathetic coaches and coaches that say, okay, right, I understand my athlete, rather than, hey, you'll do it my way, the old-fashioned.
The old-fashioned way. There is a theory that actually in coaching female teams, and there are plenty of them out there, and they may believe this or disbelieve this and may be able to prove it wrong, but it is thought that women working together do sometimes harmonise from a period perspective together. So actually that might make your life much easier.
I heard that also from Kirsty Elliott-Sale, who's a prominent researcher in this area. Right, let's go to your hot area, Karen, of genetics. So I know there's a lot of historical research around the genetics of ligament and tendon injuries. So do you want to just comment on that in general, male and female, but then obviously if there's a higher potential injury risk in certain people, we need to be more attentive to the menstrual fluctuations.
Sure, so I'll just pick one. There are a few that you can obviously choose from. I'm just going to pick what I would call the easier one, as this is going out to the masses as such, is that actually collagen type 5 or collagen type 1 or COL 5A1 or 1A1 are known as so basically it's about the body's ability to make collagen to keep all the ligaments and everything together in order for it to, be able to function properly and to reduce those particular, injuries. So, collagen itself, we obviously make it ourselves. We can provide the nutrients for the body to help to produce that as well. But also we have, from a genetic perspective, some people are at a higher predisposition or have a higher risk of what we call reduced collagen production. Now, it does not mean that you're not making collagen, you are, but unfortunately as we age we actually reduce collagen production naturally. But what it might mean is that actually if you do have SNPs, so what that means is that you have a spelling mistake in the ability to actually make that particular enzyme or transporter or whatever it is. So in other words, it may not be working as efficiently. It means that you just need to support your body in regards to collagen production. And I'm not talking about taking lots of supplements and that sort of stuff. I'm talking about providing the body with the right nutrients so it can go ahead and actually make that collagen as and when it needs to. But I always look at those two just to see if that person may have a higher risk of lower levels of collagen, which then can have an impact on injury risk as well.
Thank you. And you've focused a lot on injury risk. What other physiological aspects of a female body do we need to be considering or looking at during their menstrual cycle?
So the other things is that women tend to eat more carbs in the follicular phase and eat or fancy more fats and amino acids or proteins in the luteal phases as well. And so you might be able to, perhaps look at what that female is eating depending on her cycle, and therefore why would you not want to feed the body what it's actually looking for? So carbs, it obviously doesn't mean you go out and eat loads and loads of carbs, but obviously within the moderated and within your diet plans. But women do tend to want to eat more carbs in that first phase versus protein in the second phase.
So I've got two questions from that. Is there, is there research around the carbs, fats, proteins kind of information, or is that observational from you? And then what about the chocolate munchies in the final week?
Yeah. No, absolutely. So the research is sketchy, but my understanding is that it's all round to, if you look at the follicular phase, getting ready for ovulation, but then obviously in the luteal phase, if you've ovulated and a baby is starting to be created, then the body will need that protein in order to supply the the cells and everything from that perspective. From the munchies perspective, my understanding that's really all to do with actually the drop in those hormones if pregnancy has not occurred. So that's where that sort of, curve that you get. So that's why some women, not all, but some women do get those munchies, yeah.
It seems like many of my clients have had the munchies. That's why I know. What about measuring, measuring and tracking? So I know there's apps for everything now, and there's old-fashioned paper. How would you recommend a woman tracks her cycle, and what other methods of measuring it might you consider in a clinical setting? Like what would we use perhaps to assess a menstrual cycle?
Well, I mean, obviously, you're quite right. There are lots of apps. There are lots of all those sort of things. You can do blood testing and check so it would be the luteinizing hormone, the FSH, the estrogen, the progesterone. You could obviously look at those. Women's temperature changes just before periods due to start, so you could use that as well. And that obviously is very easy. And the athlete can do that at home. So those tend to be the two that I would actually use. But to be honest with you, most women will actually know if it's sort of on its way, just with the fact that, and again, there's you can't put this in a science research paper. It's just how you feel, and things change that then basically sort of go, okay, it's either on its way or it's just arrived. So I tend to go more with the temperature, to be honest with you, because it's an easy one to do.
Yeah, cheap and easy. You can do it at home and keep an eye on it.
Yeah.
Okay. Are you ready to go to the next phase?
Go for it.
Well, we'll age our female athlete. So she's now in her 40s, maybe early to mid 40s. She's still trying to do some competitions and training and trying to keep in shape, still get memories of her youth. But she's got 2 kids. She's got a stressful job. She's got a lot more responsibilities than she had when she was younger. And she's starting to feel not as energized as she used to. Libido's dropping a bit, maybe a bit of inflammation creeping in, and she's not recovering from her training as well as she would expect to from memory. What is now happening to her, and how can we help her?
So sort of when you get into your 40s, we've got that beginning of the word that's been bandied around an awful lot recently is the wonderful peri-menopause. And before you actually get to menopause, it can be, for some women, like a 10-year process before you actually get to the paused stage. And this is where the body is really, the hormones are starting to sort of think, hang on a minute, we've got changes coming. So therefore you sometimes get small surges of estrogen. Sometimes you get more sort of surges of progesterone. Therefore, the periods actually start to change themselves. So in that perimenopause sort of stage, you can get a situation where we've got shorter or longer periods. They can become more heavy, they can be much lighter. And this is the bit that the scientists don't like, is because there's none of us are the same. So it's all very much, how do I measure this? And so from that, that's the actual period. But when you've got things such as 2 children, or you've just got a family and life is stressful, then effectively we've got this potential slight changes in estrogen, which can then have a change on our perception of stress itself, how we actually perceive stress. And you may start to sort of respond to stressful situations slightly different. You might get a bit more annoyed at things that perhaps you wouldn't have done when you were perhaps in your 20s and 30s. So there is a sort of a stress perspective, and some women do find that they, particularly before menopause, they actually, or during menopause, they actually become a bit more anxious because they have children that they've got to look after. They do have, very stressful jobs and that sort of stuff. And tend to, when you get to the menopause, that is the time when life is literally at full speed. They've got to look after everything and everybody. And so therefore, experiences for fight or flight, those sort of things, they tend to react a bit more to. Not everybody, but from that perspective, I find perimenopausal is a time where everything is heightened.
I've made an observation with female clients that, this is just observational, I haven't read it anywhere, but I want to run it past you, that women with a high life load, high stress levels that push themselves, especially with endurance sport and going out and doing lots of distance, they seem to go into that menopause, you said perimenopause, it can be 10 years or something, so I'm talking about the bit where they know it's menopause is coming. They seem to go into that a bit younger or earlier, or in a bit more bumpy fashion than a woman that's more relaxed and less in their life. Is there anything to collaborate that? Anything in your experience?
Yeah, so basically what will sort of start to happen is that if I guess really, if you think about it, if life is becoming much more sort of not frantic but more of it, you're trying to do your best but more, so therefore you are going to be pushing yourself even more, and therefore that is going to have a bit of an effect on cortisol levels. We're going to have a potential of that. Have you ever heard of the word pregnenolone steal? So where you've got it's quite well known these days. Some scientists don't believe it's relevant, and that's fine. But when we've got the actual production of estrogen, which primarily comes from cholesterol, and normally what happens it goes through all these little processes. It goes into DHEA, which is part of the marker that we mark with cortisol, just to see what the levels are. But basically it then comes down, it is then activated, so aromatase. So in other words, estrogen is then active, it'll go and sit on the receptor, and then effectively it'll go and do its thing, and then it needs to be detoxified, and then obviously it's got rid of. But part of the estrogen production is also cortisol production. So when we get to the pregnenolone, you can go on to DHEA, or it comes down to cortisol. And for some women, what happens is that when we're in this fight or flight, or we're just on this go all the time, the poor little adrenals are sort of, on the go and the thyroid's going as well, effectively what happens is that the body's got to make more cortisol to deal with the stressors. So actually what it could do, and this is the bit that they're sort of, some are and some aren't agreeing with, is that could take some of those pro hormones that are at the very beginning away from being able to actually make the estrogen ready for, whatever it needs to go on and do. So effectively it's then stealing that and actually going on and making more cortisol. And it's that balance between the two. Now, if you agree or disagree with that, that's almost not part of this. It's just that it is certainly connected in that production of estrogen, because that pregnenolone can come down and actually make that cortisol. So that's maybe one of the reasons why, when we're in that peri-menopausal stage, that why we actually find ourselves a bit more anxious, a bit more cortisol driven, because our life is a bit harder. Sorry chaps, but our life is harder, and therefore we've got to find that drive. We've got to find that cortisol to do it.
Cool. Thanks, Karen. So I'll just repeat that phrase you used, pregnenolone steal, if anyone wants to go and look that up. And you're right, some scientists will argue that there's no such thing, and it is a lot more complicated in reality and physiologically than you described it. But it's kind of rob from Peter to pay Paul situations. And it's an easy explanation for a client as well. It's like, well, okay, that cholesterol should be going to DHEA and then make your estrogen and testosterone's on that side as well. So men are affected the same way. Women are affected. Testosterone's important for libido. So libido, I find, is a good red flag of just, hormonally lacking a wee bit. And then it can be diverted metaphorically, if nothing else, to cortisol. So I think it's an important concept that we can't do everything all at once physiologically. We have a finite capability to do one thing or other. And I think a lot of people start learning that as they get older. But certainly in the 40s, you're still trying to act like you're in your 30s. Well, many folk are. So thank you, that was good. I just want to layer in a comment from Anne in the chat box. She said, this phase that we're talking about was interesting for me as an athlete. She was a rower, and she said, described it hormonally, it was hang on for the ride, but my confidence as an athlete was much higher than in my 20s. So there's another personalized difference. Any comments?
Yeah, but also because don't forget we're coming up to a crescendo here, aren't we? We're flying high. We've got kids doing this. We've got and that drive is to keep everything going is there, absolutely, and I do agree with that. A little bit more cortisol will actually help you to keep that going. So I don't disagree with that at all.
And just to add on to that, Karen, in my experience, you get some people who they must have very large, abundant adrenal glands because they just seem to do everything and keep going. Whereas others are a little bit more fragile, so they try and take on one too many things and then their health starts suffering. So yes, there's a big personalization there.
Yeah, absolutely.
Do you want to talk about detoxification? Because hormones, hey, we need to make them. You've just been talking about a bit about that. We need to use them, and then we need to get rid of them. So there's a lot of talk of estrogen dominance nowadays, and detoxification comes into that. So do you want to sort of explain that dynamic to us as well?
So once we've made our estrogens, and for women that's primarily E2, E1, and at this stage we're still making E2 is still the most made estrogen. After menopause we switch to E2, effectively what happens is, and this is actually the same for chaps as well, is testosterone has to be sort of deactivated by particular enzymes. They're known as CYP enzymes. There's 3 or 4 that we know of. There's probably a lot more that we know of, that we don't know of. But effectively, those particular enzymes, they, I guess really, they effectively deactivate. But there is a key gene that effectively is adding a methyl group to either the E2, E1, or wherever it might be. And effectively, what will happen is that they'll be converted into 2-hydroxy, 4-hydroxy, and 16-alpha hydroxy. And then the methyl group is added to those, and once it's added, it's in a package ready for the body to be able to get rid of. Now, the gene, which is COMT, catechol-methyltransferase, I believe it's called, from memory, is the actual sort of, it's the facilitator of that methyl group being added. This is where, for a lot of people, where the detoxification of estrogens or testosterones becomes a mild problem, because actually a lot of people have SNPs on their COMT genes, and therefore what then happens is the way that I've now started to I guess really describe it is, if you're in a warehouse that's got a whole load of I guess really a conveyor belt. So if you think of 2, 4 and 16 alpha being in a box on a conveyor belt, and if you think of COMT as the arm that comes out that puts the label on the box so that at the end of the conveyor belt it knows where to be shipped to. Okay, so 2, 4 and 16 come along, COMT then puts the label on. But unfortunately, sometimes with people that have got SNPs on COMT, what will happen is that label arm coming over is actually really quite slow. So unfortunately, some of the boxes fall off of the conveyor belts, which is where the estrogen dominance comes, because it hasn't actually got to the end of the conveyor belt, hasn't got the label on it, it doesn't know what postal sort of bag to go in order for it to go out. So that's obviously where it's going out in the feces and all that sort of stuff. So from that perspective, what happens then is we've got 2 warehouse operatives, and they have to come and bring those boxes back round to the very beginning so that COMT can have another go and put the labels on. And that's what's potentially happening with those. That's what a lot of people believe estrogen dominance is it's that actually it's still hanging around. We can't quite get it out of that last phase there. I hope that helps people to understand that.
Good analogy. So I know about COMT, but that brought a whole new life to it. So again, some genetics. Methylation is important with B vitamins, and we'll go on to nutrition in a little bit as well. So how do we improve that process? Because genetics is not about just, hey, you've got these genes, they're hardwired into you. That was the kind of Watson and Crick model in the 1950s. A lot of doctors still believe that. Oh, sorry, you're going to die of a heart attack. It's just your genetics. Put up with it. We think very differently, because we know that nutrition, lifestyle, stress, exercise, toxicity, they all interact with our genes. So with that in mind, we've got the woman in her 40s dealing with a bit too high stress, maybe a bit of estrogen dominance because she's depleting her B vitamins and not clearing it out, and maybe some genetics in there as well. How do we support her?
So there's some really easy things that we can do. So one of the first things you can do is to help that label going on, to help COMT, is to ensure you've got good levels of magnesium going in, because COMT is supported by magnesium, or in actual fact it is magnesium dependent. So the first thing you can do effectively is, now obviously testing magnesium levels in the blood may not be, the 100%, but look at your diet, look at how much magnesium you've got going in. If you've got digestive issues, do we have a little bit of absorption problems? So just think about that from that perspective, okay? Secondly, when we're looking at vitamins and minerals, when we're getting into that phase, quite a lot of the women that I have spoken to that have gone into menopause and have had quite severe menopausal symptoms, when you actually look at their vitamin and mineral profile, they are depleted in pretty much nearly, well, not everything, but they are depleted in quite a few of the main vitamins and minerals. So iron being one of them, magnesium being the other, vitamin C being another, and B vitamins in total as well. All right, so one of the easiest things that you can do is ensure that that person, first of all, is eating all of the right food groups. Secondly, to ensure that you're testing to make sure that levels aren't going up down like a yo-yo. But also, going back to the estrogen just for a little bit, those CYP enzymes that are mildly touched on are also iron dependent. And an awful lot of athletes are quite depleted in iron because of what they're doing. I'm not a fan of putting just iron in, and Ian will know me from old. It's all actually about the absorption of the iron from the food that they are currently eating. So we need to maximise that, in my opinion. So really, it's all about checking the the minerals, the vitamins. If they are depleted, please make sure that you support them by bringing them back into the normal levels.
Cool, right. So this is really important. It's our domain of, okay, is an athlete nourished? When we have an athlete, certainly when pushing, they're using more. They're using more nutrition to not fuel, wrong word, to support all these pathways that you're talking about. Now, what we find certainly nowadays, but it's been the case for many years, although it seems to be a bit worse now, you're getting terms like REDS, relative energy deficiency in sport, coming around. You get a lot of disordered eating patterns, especially in women, but in some men as well. Now, that's just picking up on what you've just been talking about. Eating enough is key to start with, but eating enough good quality stuff is really, really fundamental, because a lot of women will just not eat enough and they'll over-exercise because of the weight management thing. But hopefully you can hear from what Karen's just said there that, they might be holding on to weight because of the dysregulation of the hormones because they're trying too hard. So sometimes it's like, okay, just pull back a bit, slow down, eat a bit more food, let's get into your greens, take a few vitamins, and you'll generally feel a bit better. And another one that comes in a lot now is fasted morning training. So I've worked with a lot of female athletes who have been doing that, wondering why they're exhausted in the afternoon and not recovering from their training. So bring in a simple breakfast and it can make a world of difference.
Absolutely. And the thing is as well is that we're not asking you to, really reinvent the wheel in regards to, these really sort of all singing, all dancing meals. We're just saying, please have a look at what you are eating. Have a look at what you are actually doing from a exercise perspective, and are the two meeting together, because if you're exercising too much, you're naturally going to be using more vitamins and minerals. The body's got to, because the processes are there's more. So what we need to do is bring that up, and therefore actually you'll get better times, you'll get better this, that and the other. But you're quite right. Women do feel that eating less is better. But on some occasions that's not actually appropriate.
Before we move on, I'll just give a little example of competition for nutrients. So you've been talking about methylation, and that's very B vitamin dependent. Magnesium's in a lot of these processes, zinc is. All of these nutrients are in the Krebs cycle. And your Krebs cycle is that beautiful energetic pathway in our mitochondria that make all the ATP to drive the muscles. So more training, more Krebs cycle use of nutrients, less available for detoxification, making neurotransmitters, etc., etc. Right, so let's age her a bit more. She's now in her, let's say, mid to late 50s. She's got no periods anymore. You would firmly call her postmenopausal. She's at a different life stage. Her kids have left home. She's anticipating retirement soon. She's started being able to slow down a wee bit. And her friends have started talking about this phrase that Peter Attia, the famous podcaster, is going on about, healthspan instead of lifespan. So healthspan is healthy aging rather than last 10 years in a nursing home. So how do we now support her? She doesn't have quite so many demands, but obviously hormonally she's in a very different place in her life, and she still wants to be active. She doesn't want to hit 60, retire and watch the TV for the rest of her life.
Absolutely. So, and that is possible, but I'm going to throw in something that some people may not know about in regards to wanting to continue her exercising. But a lot of women who are postmenopausal, sort of between the ages, so the average female in the UK hits menopause at about 50. That's the average. But of course, none of us are average, so it could be 51, 52. So what I tend to say is around about 55 or so, and again, that's just an average, I find that women have they just have these little niggles. They have tummy troubles. They have little headaches and bits and pieces that they've never had before. They tend to come in, and therefore that tends to disrupt the exercise that they want to do, or whatever it is that they still want to continue doing. And the reason I want to put this in is because I think it's fundamental for people to at least investigate. So estrogen, or E2 estrogen, is highly protective of the mucosal lining. And once we actually have a lesser amount of that, which is obviously the natural reason for menopause, as in you're not producing anywhere near as many E2, what happens is the protective effect of estrogen is reduced, and therefore we have got potentially, it's not for everybody, but potentially we've got this beginning of the it's not breakdown, but we've got this disturbance in the mucosal lining. And then unfortunately what then happens is, when the mucosal lining isn't as nice and tight and got all those lovely tight junctions, the things that we used to be able to eat, or things that we used to be able to do, effectively what happens is we have these endotoxins or lipopolysaccharides, etc., that are then released into bloodstream or wherever that isn't supposed to be there, which then starts this inflammatory cascade. So those cytokines come out and go, this isn't supposed to be here, and it will promote this inflammatory response. And I find that women that are in perimenopausal stage, that effectively they are naturally at a higher risk of inflammation, purely and simply just because of one thing. There are multiple other things that could be going on, but this is I think more I think not looked at very often, and is just sort of brushed over, or perhaps people don't know about it as much. And therefore, we really need to actually look after that mucosal lining. But also, even if you just think about it, if you've got an athlete and they've been running and they've got all that sort of digestive upset anyway, haven't they? They've got those structural sort of, things going on by the fact that they've been running or they've been jumping and that sort of stuff. In actual fact, sometimes those things are more evident in perimenopause, in postmenopause, purely simply because of the mucosal lining in the guts. So if we can support gut health from 50 onwards, or perhaps even before then, but at least from 50 onwards, and actually really do a proper a proper support for the mucosal lining, I think that actually reduces quite a lot of the issues that women actually have when they are in that stage of life.
Okay, so we've established gut mucosa is important, which will affect every other mucosal membrane in the body as well. How do we support that? Give us a few tips.
Yes, so first of all, what we do need to do is we need to look at particular probiotic strains that are going to aid or support the mucosal lining, first of all. Secondly, if the junctions are becoming a bit sort of leaky, which you can't stop completely, but we need to put measures into place to reduce that inflammatory response, which you can do very easily. And from that perspective, then that's when we need to reduce the stress and that sort of stuff. Look at sleep, look at what you're eating, look at things that are foods that have perhaps you maybe have been able to eat forever and all of a sudden you're getting reactions from. Experiment and take in or eat or take out, but please don't just take whole food groups out just thinking that will be it. Go and do some testing and see how that is. But personally, for a happy postmenopausal life, it is actually down to gut health, nutrient intake, sleep, and starting to enjoy yourself.
The gut-brain axis.
Yes.
Yeah, I agree wholeheartedly with that. Just with many years of working with clients, sometimes even though you're going in with good nutritional choices, it's always an uphill battle because their nervous system is in a very tense sympathetic or fight and flight dominant state, and then just nothing really hits home. So that's important. So that's when we get them into, well as that running that you want to do, let's do some yoga. And I talk about yin yang of exercise. So really getting more into that yin yang perspective, because that's going to take you into old age, as opposed to trying to do a half marathon every second weekend, as my clients in South Africa used to do. Or maybe more like marathons. So great, mucosal support, really looking at how you're eating. We have a webinar on from Kayleen Bogdan, who's an American dietitian, on the elimination protocol and reintroduction. So anyone watching or listening to this, we can give you a link to that as well. Right, Davina McCall, HRT, your thoughts? So if lack of E2 is causing mucosal disruption, do we just go in and add some back?
So first of all, I don't believe that HRT is right for everybody. Again, it has to be, in my opinion, given on a case-by-case perspective. Obviously, I would hope that your GP would look at that case and obviously prescribe appropriately. But my thoughts are that, women that do have a horrid time in, menopause, and I certainly don't want to take away the fact that women really do have a horrific time in menopause, and HRT is right for them if that reduces the symptoms, etc., etc. So please don't feel that I'm not supportive of that. I personally believe that any medication should really be on an individual basis. And there are clients that I've had of mine who absolutely sail on HRT, and there are some who absolutely don't. And therefore they've worked with their GP and sort of navigated around it. But again, it's the usual thing. One thing is not going to work for everybody, but it can be a lifesaver for some women.
So you've given us a little bit of genetic insight with estrogen metabolism before. So do you want to go back there? 'Cause I'd like you to just give your thoughts on the risk of overdoing estrogen in the body if you're not metabolizing enough.
Yeah, so effectively, if you're, from the beginning of estrogen metabolism, or the making and the aromatizing and the detoxification of it, women who have had, again, like we said earlier on, estrogen dominance, then, for those women, the metabolism of medications may or may not be suitable, because it's similar CYP enzymes that actually metabolize certain medications, and therefore maybe that needs to be looked into with regards to whether HRT is right for them or not.
And if it's really not right for them, then there's obviously the well-documented risk of estrogen-related cancers and so on. So I think I can see you're being very diplomatic with that question. You're giving a well-balanced answer. It needs to be on a case-by-case basis. I believe thoroughly. I have also dealt with women at that stage. They need to be tested before and during HRT to see the responses, and that needs to be adjusted. Very often women are just put on HRT and then left, and that's the dangerous scenario, not the fact that they're on it or not. If somebody like one of your clients you just mentioned really doesn't, their health plummets, they have a hard time on HRT, but they're really struggling with the menopausal phase, what alternatives would you consider? Maybe, let's say, light options like nutritional, and maybe herbal, bioidentical, so if you can just give a few thoughts there.
So with bioidentical, obviously I would be mildly cautious if somebody hasn't really responded to HRT, first of all, because they are bioidentical. So that wouldn't be my first call, because again, you're putting a hormone back in that has obviously naturally reduced, but again, they may be appropriate for some women. But for me personally, and for the clients that I've had that have been in this sort of situation, is actually herbal, from a herbalist, has actually been the saviour for women. Food will certainly help. Nervines, and I'm talking about chamomile, rosemary, passion flower, which you can get in teas, certainly is going to help from that perspective. But to really, for the women that have real severe sort of symptoms, I tend to send them straight to herbalists that I work with. And then once those symptoms have started to sort of calm down again, then we carry on with the protocol. They carry on with eating the right foods all the way through, but sometimes herbal remedies are the way to go.
Thanks, Karen. And you've said something really important there. You refer them off to a herbalist who's very experienced in working with the herbs. That's always also another area that women will self-diagnose and take themselves to high street health shops and buy the herbs and just jump on. So I think I've been very close to herbal practitioners as well, using really strong and good quality herbs, and they need to be personalised for the person. So yeah, I absolutely back up what you're saying there. And if you get the herbalist tapping into the right mix for you, it can really have incredible results. So herbs and nutrition, or sometimes you need to go a little bit further, but often we're jumping into the more extreme measure first rather than trying the lighter changes first. So thank you. We've taken Our Lady through various different life phases. Have you got anything else you'd like to kind of add to the whole discussion before we finish off?
No, I mean, I cannot stress enough how important in any life stage that sleep is. In regards to, it might be that you reduce your training so that you can get the right amount of sleep for you, instead of just having 4 or 5 hours and hoping for the best. Because for me, in my understanding, is that only really sort of, if you don't sleep well in your early through to menopause, that again can be a factor. But please don't be frightened of eating well. Just provide your body with the right nutrients so that you can get the best out of your body. And yeah, just enjoy it.
I often change the word that's often used associated with nutrition, and that's fuel. How do we fuel the body? I change it to how do we nourish the body? And it puts a different psychological spin on it, because fuel, well, if we have too much fuel, we might put on weight. But you can never over-nourish your body, because that's going more into the nutrients and the support of the pathways and feeling good. So it's always a psychological journey that we're doing alongside the nutrition work that we do. So Karen, thank you. Thank you so much. I've really enjoyed it. If somebody wants to get hold of you or look you up, where do they go to?
Go to the Team Gene website. There is a contact form on there. Just by all means, just put your details in there and they'll be more than happy to give you a tinkle back or email back. That's absolutely no problem at all.
Excellent. Thank you. It's been a pleasure.
It's been wonderful. Thanks, Ian, for inviting me.
I really appreciate the generous input of Karen and all my other guests on the Health Feeds Performance podcast. To watch or to listen to any of my other interviews, please subscribe to our YouTube channel or jump onto one of the audio channels like Spotify and Apple and so on. And I would really like to hear what you would like us to cover in future podcasts. So please jump onto our website, intsportsnutrition.com, and you can connect through our contact page. And while you're on there, have a wee look at all the sports nutrition courses that we run. So thanks for joining, and until next time, bye for now.